Hello and welcome to the Stormont Sources podcast, where we take you inside politics at Stormont and inside policy making for Northern Ireland. I'm David McCann, and also on the podcast are Tim Kearns, former Special Advisor to First Minister Peter Robinson and Head of Policy for the DUP. Hello, Tim.
Hi, David.
And we also have our other regular, Michael McKernan. He was a former Special Advisor to the SDLP. He worked in the executive from 2007 to 2016. Hello, Michael.
Hello, David. Hello, Tim.
On the podcast today, we're discussing the draft anti-poverty strategy. The long-awaited plan that has been 2 decades in the making is out for consultation. The Communities Minister Gordon Lyons published the draft version back in June, but many groups who deal with policy issues are not happy. We'll be speaking with one of the leading academics in this field, Dr. Ciara Fitzpatrick, about some of her concerns. Also, later on the podcast, we'll be talking about the new Irish language Ulster Scots and British Heritage Commissioners, the names of which were leaked last week. We'll be asking, will these 2 new posts actually achieve anything? All that and more coming up on this edition of Stormont Sources. You can watch the conversation on YouTube, search for Stormont Sources, where we upload clips for you to enjoy. Head over to YouTube, subscribe to our channel there for videos and updates. You can follow us on X, watch clips on TikTok. You can view us on Instagram, subscribe to our mailing list at stormontsources.com. Remember to leave us a review on your podcast app, although if it's anything less than 4 stars, please don't bother. You can send us a WhatsApp, 0333 404 6507. Remember to use the word Stormont. And you can also send us an email, hello@stormontsources.com. We read everything you send in, so please keep the comments coming. Also, north of 6,000 views just on YouTube alone for last week's episode. So thank you so much for all the very kind comments that we're getting in and the growing audience. You're all very welcome joining us here on Stormont Sources. Okay, into the podcast topic today. Our main lead, we're looking at the draft anti-poverty strategy. So the need for an anti-poverty strategy has been debated for 2 decades in Northern Ireland. The wheels of policy move incredibly slowly in this part of the world. As many of you will be aware, parts of Northern Ireland have some of the worst deprivation rates in the UK, and campaigners have been arguing that we need a comprehensive plan to tackle the causes of poverty in our society. The Communities Minister Gordon Lyons published a draft strategy in June of this year. The strategy has 3 pillars. So the 3 pillars are aiming to minimise the risk of people falling into poverty, helping minimise the impacts of poverty on people's lives, and working with people to exit them from poverty. Speaking about the plan, Minister Lyons said, "I recognise and understand the concern that the absence of this document has had for many years. Today I'm taking action and doing something about that. Not because I want to publish a document in order to simply tick a box, but I want us to have a joined-up, coordinated plan to tackle poverty." However, others disagree. 75 organisations have signed a letter asking for it to be withdrawn. And joining us today is Dr. Ciara Fitzpatrick from Ulster University. She is a critic of this strategy, but many people who follow these debates will be very well aware of Ciara's work. She campaigns on poverty, anti-poverty issues, and also does a great deal of research in this area. So Ciara, you're very welcome to join us today on Stormont Sources.
Good morning, David. Thanks so much for having me.
So Ciara, just walk us through the journey to get to this point. I mean, 2 decades just to get to a draft strategy. What on earth has gone on that's taken us this long to get to this point?
Absolutely. Poverty was recognised as far back as 1998 in the delivery of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement. It was in 2006 when it was really enshrined into law that the government would produce an anti-poverty strategy that would develop a plan to tackle poverty based on objective need. Now, we got as far as 2015. There was still no poverty plan produced. And so the CAJ, the Committee for the Administration of Justice, actually took a judicial review on the matter. And the High Court judged that the executive had failed in its commitment to bring an anti-poverty strategy. Fast forward another almost 10 years, and we have a second judicial review case where the High Court really confirms what it had said the last time. So it's been a huge and a long and frustrating road with a lot of campaigning, and there was a lot of sort of build up to the release of this anti-poverty strategy. And obviously, you have referenced the letter that has been signed by 75 organisations to really recognise that what was published is more than a huge disappointment, and the view is that it's just not good enough, and it isn't actually a strategy, as it doesn't fulfil what the judge in the High Court set out needed to be there for it to qualify as a strategy.
So, Ciara, walk us through then, because I mean, so the organisations and other campaigners like yourself are arguing for this to be withdrawn. Is it really that bad? I mean, what's the what for those of us who maybe don't study these things as in detail as you do? What is so bad about this strategy?
Most of the strategy really consists of policies that have already been in train for the last 10 plus years that are not making considerable difference to the poverty levels in Northern Ireland, which continue to rise. We are seeing things like continue to pay free school meals, continue to pay the school uniform grant, with no enhancements, changes, or investments to policies such as these to improve the situation in Northern Ireland. We're seeing a rise in child poverty from 1 in 5 children to 1 in 4 children now being in relative poverty. And we're seeing other countries, other devolved nations, and England policy made in Westminster to try and improve this situation, and no equivalent policies being made in Northern Ireland. So one example around free school meals is that the Labour government has committed to rolling out breakfast clubs nationally. They are making a difference. There is another commitment to extend the provision of free school meals to all those people who are entitled to universal credit. That means there's no cliff edge when people sort of earn a penny over the means tested threshold. These are actions that they're taking now. And I've started to talk a lot about sub-parity in Northern Ireland because we're not following our counterparts in the UK at the same pace, and that means that our children are going to suffer ultimately. So we needed to see things like that in the strategy. There's no investment promised. There's no clear plan. There's no clear targets, objectives. It's really, it's 27, 28 pages. It just is not a credible plan to tackle poverty.
And you mentioned the I word there, which is the key thing for everything in Northern Ireland, is investment in terms of money. So I'm going to guess, if the minister was here, he's not, but Stormont's broke at the minute. Stormont is struggling to kind of balance its books as is. So, I mean, is he not maybe just kind of doing the more kind of honourable thing about putting forward a more kind of realistic strategy? And I know that term has been used about what can be achieved, rather than maybe 28 pages of glossy promises that might not think. Is there no merit in that approach?
There's no merit in that approach because it shows absolutely, no commitment to changing the dial on poverty. So it's really quite ironic that in Gordon Lyon's announcements, he said he didn't seek to tick a box. That's exactly what he's doing through the publication of this strategy. If it's not going to make a difference, what is the point of publishing a plan that will not make a difference? It's absolutely ridiculous, to be quite honest. And my point of view is that Stormont does have money. It's just not managing the money properly. Actually, if it looked at poverty as a long running problem, a problem that we have committed to solve for over 20 years, it needs investment, and we only have to look at the outworkings. So I put a tweet out last week that got quite a bit of traction, a study by Queen's looking at deprivation levels in the UK. Northern Ireland has 27% of its people leaving education with no qualifications after the age of 16. Poverty is the major foundation for that result. We need to close the gap between people who are advantaged and people who are disadvantaged, and we have failed to do that, and it's now becoming a generational problem. I also read the story in the Irish News that showed that those young people that are not in education, employment or training has effectively doubled in a 12-month period. We need to deal with poverty from the moment a child is born, before a child is born, and nothing in the anti-poverty strategy is going to support us to do that.
So obviously, Gordon Lance talks about the need to have a comprehensive thing. So quite a bit of this is going to be cross-cutting in the executive. It's not just going to be the Department for Communities carrying the load on that. The Department of Health is going to have a role in this. Other departments, Department of Education, for example. So obviously, the other parties in the executive will have a role in actually kind of putting this through as well. So if you were an Alliance minister, Sinn Féin minister, UUP minister listening to this, obviously I'm going to assume that the UUP ministers are going to be backing Gordon on this, but if you're, what would you be urging them to do on this? What would you say to the Michelle O'Neills, the Naomi Longs of this world, the Mike Nesbitts?
Look, that's an absolutely key point. And as campaigners, the 75 organisations, we've been totally clear on this. This is not solely the responsibility of Gordon Lyons, who has delivered this strategy. This strategy belongs to the whole executive, and it's the whole executive that need to take ownership of it. So it was absolutely shocking that the whole executive agreed to allow this strategy to be published. And it really, to me, personally, shows the level of dysfunction that we have at the executive table, that they allowed this strategy to come out and really to allow the sector now to have to do the hard work of trying to convince our whole executive that it needs to be abandoned and they need to go back to the drawing board. I don't need to outline the huge amount of work that has been commissioned and done over the last 20 years on an anti-poverty strategy. The huge amount of money that has been spent on commissioning reports, on commissioning experts, the same as health and education. We're seeing this pattern run over and over again, where we have all the evidence and then we see an absolutely useless outcome. And it's not just disappointing for those of us who are, so close to this day after day, but more so for the huge numbers of people who this directly impacts. So my message to the executive is this strategy is not worth the paper that it's written on, and we need everybody to go back to the drawing board and to fund at least one measure that is going to make a genuine difference in the lives of people who need it most.
You just led me on very nicely there to where I was going to take the conversation. And this is actually, okay, so if this is no good, what could we do differently? So what would you like to see? So say Gordon Lyons, like this is still out for consultation, by the way, until September. So what would you like to see? So say Gordon Lyons is listening to this, and hello Gordon if you're listening, and he goes, God, you know what, Ciara's right. Ciara's right. You know what, maybe we should go back to the drawing board. And if he could come back with something, what would you like to see in that there, if you were his special advisor for that?
I mean, Gordon, if you give me a price envelope, I can suggest lots of different measures. If we're looking at a big ticket item, if we're looking at something that's going to make a huge impact immediately, it's obviously the mitigation of the two-child limit. And that's something that Scotland has committed to do for next year. Now, we had a welfare reform mitigations review. A panel of experts and economists actually costed what that would be over a sort of 4 or 5 year period. By this stage, that measure would be in the 60 millions sort of envelope. I don't know the exact figure and I'm not going to try and remember it, but that's where we would be at. We would be in the tens of millions. That would be my big ticket item. That would make a huge difference. In one measure, you would take a huge number of children straight out of poverty. But we could also do any number of smaller things that other devolved nations are doing. For example, Wales also claim to be broke an awful lot of the time. They have extended free school meals universally to all primary school children. That means all primary school children are getting a hot meal a day. We can see the introduction of a best start payment, which is what has happened in Scotland. And actually, the Welfare Reform Mitigations Review suggested doing this as a sort of a payment that would come to families who are disadvantaged at critical transitions. So when a child is born, when it's going into primary school, when it's moving into secondary school. Now, the price for that was about 10 million for 1 year. So, we can do small and incremental things. We can make a difference in little ways. Restore the holiday hunger payments. Stormont led the way on this in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, where we had direct payment, £27 a month, going to parents of families who were entitled to free school meals. Now, that's about 96,000 people in Northern Ireland are in receipt of free school meals at last count. It's probably more at this stage. They had a free school meal payment during the holiday periods. So this 8 weeks of holidays, really difficult for families who are struggling to make sure their kids are fed. I have 3 young kids myself. They're constantly hungry. That would have made a huge difference as well. Those payments were cut in 2023. Even to see the restoration of those payments would have been a big move for Stormont, and something to give us who are campaigning in this area hope and an indication that the Department for Communities and the whole executive really do care about this. So there's a huge number of things that could have been done. We didn't see any of that, none of it in the strategy.
We comment on this a lot, and again, Michael, Tim, we'll get into this after the interview. Well, why does Stormont not seem to be able to do this kind of policy innovation? You've just referenced what's going on in Scotland, in Wales, but yet here it just seems to be, and it's not just Gordon Lands. Like you hear the refrain from ministers across the piece is, "Well, Westminster are making us do it, and we can't. Or we could tinker around the edges. We can mitigate a little bit of it." But what for you, who studied the other devolved regions, what are they doing that we're not? Like, why does that not exist here?
Well, look, I actually spoke to a chief executive of the Robertson Trust in Scotland. And I asked him the exact same question, because I was like, why are we not using our devolved powers? Why are we not really trying to innovate? We are a small place. We could do things so much better. What is the problem? And he said, particularly around social security, when Scotland got those powers post-referendum, they wanted to grab the nettle. They wanted to show people that, okay, we've been given these powers and we are going to use them, and we are going to use them for the betterment of our people. And they felt the sort of the pressure to do that and to show that they could actually take on this challenge. And is it political instability in Northern Ireland? Is it, the way our power sharing executive is working or not working, that we aren't showing the same ambition? It seems like I feel like we've been set up to fail on this, and we're not using those devolved levers that we could to make a difference in people's lives. And for me, as a personal citizen, outside my life as academia and campaigning, it's the most frustrating thing for me. It's very difficult to be beside this day after day and see that, MLAs have been given this power, ministers have been given this power, and they are not using it to create a better life and a better society for the people who live here.
Yeah, and it kind of erodes confidence in devolution as well, in terms of, well, if you can't do anything, people say, well, what's the point of it being there? Last question for you, Ciara, before we let you go, is for the strategy skeptics amongst us. I know we've talked about this privately, but I am a strategy skeptic just in the main, not just on this, because a lot of them, and you've kind of highlighted some of the reasons for that, don't actually ever see the light of day. I mean, Gordon Lyons talked about ticking a box, but for a lot of them it is ticking a box. So, I mean, do we need a comprehensive written down strategy on this, or is it just a case of John O'Dowd committing in a budget that we're tackling this? Is a strategy really necessary for this?
I think what the last 20 years have shown us is that we need written down in black and white, in legislation, commitments that our executive are going to make to people who are currently in poverty. And that's really just to help us hold them to account. So it shows you just how poor this strategy actually is when we're telling them that it needs to be binned, because it's actually more harmful to have this particular strategy than no strategy at all. So in the long run, yes, I think we need a plan written into law that has targets attached to it to make sure that we have proper accountability for ministers around the executive table to tackle poverty. So I agree with you. I'm a strategy skeptic much of the time. I am absolutely sort of dismayed at the amount of investment that has been ploughed into expert reports, to consultation after consultation. We have a burnt out community and voluntary sector from responding to consultation after consultation and seeing no change. It's hugely frustrating and it's unproductive and inefficient. But in this case, I strongly believe that we need a commitment to solve poverty, and it needs to be committed into law.
Thank you so much for coming and joining us today on Stormont Sources.
Thank you so much.
Welcome back to Stormont Sources. We were listening there to Dr. Ciara Fitzpatrick running through the draft anti-poverty strategy, and just a reminder, even though she was saying about kind of the death by consultations that we had, it is still out for consultation for another few weeks, so if you are so minded to give a response to it. Michael, I'm going to start with you on this. Listening to Ciara, she was giving a pretty dire analysis of the anti-poverty strategy. Do you think she's right?
I do, yes. When you get 75 organisations coming together and saying, can you please throw this in the bin, that we would be better off with no strategy, even though we've been crying out for one for 20 years. We'd be better off with none than this particular document. Now, I've read the document, and it's 30 odd pages. First quarter of it is just introducing how you interface with the consultation and so on. So it's a bit light overall in substance, but like so many of these executive documents, it is just platitudinous. There are no targets, there are no timescales, no real ambition, nothing tangible, just a lot of platitudes. Like its overall objective is working together, poverty and its impacts will be effectively and sustainably eradicated across our communities. So they're just going to get rid of poverty. They're going to eradicate it. Now, why didn't they say we're going to reduce, via this strategy, we're going to reduce relative poverty, which is running at 20% of households, to 10% of households, within 5 years, and then set out the intermediate steps. And I know we'll come on to say that, are these strategies and consultations worth bothering about? I'm a great believer in strategy. I think if you do a really sound strategic analysis on an issue and you have clear objectives that are agreed and supported, I think that can take you a long way forward. Obviously, it has to follow up with the necessary resources. But as a framework, a friend of mine's always saying success has a structure. As a framework, if you want to achieve success in a particular area, then a really good strategy takes you a long way from your starting position. And this one doesn't. This is platitudinous, just like the programme for government. It identifies kind of the risk factors, how you are at risk of falling into poverty, and then if you do, here are the impacts it can have on you, and then finally here are some exit routes out of poverty. One of the areas where they identified a risk factor was, if you have poor housing, then that's going to limit you. So what's their solution to that on housing? Everyone will have access to good quality, affordable and sustainable housing. Everyone. Sustainable, affordable, problem solved. It's just so silly. It's so silly. Why didn't they say for housing we will try and build? The programme for government was one of the few things that did put a little bit of a target in for, which wouldn't have solved the housing problem, but at least it was a target. But even weeks after that, the minister says, "I'm never going to achieve that target." They're going to bring ridicule upon themselves if they keep producing these kind of silly, intellectually dishonest documents. And Ciara's absolutely right. She gave a good interview and you asked her some good questions, and it's pretty clear that this thing is just not fit for purpose.
Positive reviews for the interview I will take. I'm glad you directed your fire at the strategy. But what about Tim? Do you take any? Is there any positives from the draft strategy as is out there?
I'm sorry that it's just going to be agreement all around here, but the simple answer is there's no positives to take away. Look, if this is a report before you write a strategy, if that was being published to say, look, this is what we're doing to date, full stop. Now we're going to build on that, and this is what we're going to do going forward. This is what's worked in the past. This isn't what's working. This is what we see in other jurisdictions working, and this is our report. We're establishing our evidence base. If that's what it was, it would still be pretty weak sauce, but at least you would be saying, right, well, okay, they're establishing an evidence base of what we're doing. But, when you probe this in the interview, looking across at Scotland, looking across at Wales. Now, Scotland and Wales aren't doing anything that's anyway incredibly magic below. But we will see what happens next year in 2026 when Scotland abolishes or effectively abolishes the two-child limit in welfare payments. And, a lot of people are saying that's going to be the way to be able to start to seriously address at least childhood poverty, and I think that's right. I happen to be one of those people that agrees with that. Now, if we bring that back to Northern Ireland, every party agrees with abolishing the two-child limit in Northern Ireland. So why are we not putting in place that mitigation as well? So Scotland also has the Scottish child payment as well, which is a payment that goes to 325,000 households with kids up to the age of 16, which is a little top up for people on benefits to essentially to child benefit payment. You get more money if you're on benefits. Now, why are we not doing that as well? Why are we not looking at that? Scotland's been doing that for quite a few years now, and that's been credited with lifting, I think it's 40 or 50,000 kids out of poverty. So there are things happening which clearly can be paid for within the budgets that devolved administrations have. We're making choices not to do that. That's the reality. We are making a choice not to make that child payment. We're making a choice to say we want the two-child limit abolished, but we want somebody else to do it.
I think
and those are our choices.
I think
the argument comes back again that we're broke.
But we're not broke. We've made a choice to pay for something else. So you stop paying for something else.
I agree.
That's what Scotland has done.
Yeah.
People can criticise those choices, but that's the choice they've made.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. And the reason I praised your interview, David, was if I had been asking Ciara, been asking her about this, I would have said to her, well, what if John O'Dowd got all the different ministers in and said, look, I want to do something here about poverty, and I want you to surrender whatever you can out of your budget, and he gathers together a fund of money. I would like to ask the anti-poverty people, what would you do with the money if you had a little pile of money available for anti-poverty? You asked that question in shorts, and Ciara did answer it, and her first priority was the two-child thing to mitigate that. So they do have the answers, and if the experts are telling you, here, if you can assemble some resources, here are the priority areas where you could have the maximum impact on poverty with whatever resource you've got available. And she was able to answer those questions, and I think she had a list of things depending on how much money was available. So, as Tim says, we could raise some money for poverty, we could take it out of budgets, and we could target it at the things that the experts are telling us will have the greatest impact, and we have chosen not to do that.
Why then, Tim? Why have we chosen not to do that?
Well,
because Northern Ireland's not exactly a burgeoning place for right-wing kind of politics. I mean, our parties are, in the main parties are economically centre-left. So even the DUP are socially conservative, but they're left-wing on economics. They love spending public money. Ulster Unionists.
Well, every party in Northern Ireland wants to abolish the two-child limit because, and even Reform want to abolish the two-child limit, so I'm not sure that it's terribly much of a left-wing issue anymore. It seems to be only the Labour Party who don't want to abolish the two-child limit now because it costs a lot of money. Look, it's going to cost 155 million in Scotland to abolish that limit, so you've got to imagine that here, I think Ciara
60
million here. That might be a little high on the estimate, I don't know, but it's going to be somewhere in that region. Now, we have mitigated welfare payments before. I mean, when the great welfare reform debates of 10, 12 years ago, I mean, we mitigated some of the changes in universal credit at that time. So we have made those choices to do that, and we have made the choices to take away spending from some other places to apply it to some of these welfare mitigations. Scotland and Wales have made those choices. We can make those choices as well. And I think, look, it'd be very easy to give the Alliance Party answer and say, it's because of a divided society with duplication services and all of that. I actually don't know that really is fundamentally the problem. I think it's because we lack a bravery.
It is in education, but that's another.
Well, we're not going back there. I think we lack a bravery in our politics to make a decision that may be unpopular. to say we're going to close down this particular project, we're going to stop funding this particular thing because this is now our priority. Our priority is mitigating some of the welfare decisions that Westminster have taken. And I think there are some parties who say they would like to see those things mitigated, but they don't want to be the politician taking the decision to do that because it may prove to be unpopular with some who they consider to be supporting them. And I think I think it's just this lack of bravery that we have to take these big decisions and make these big choices. And I just don't think we have that within our parties.
Michael, in terms of, I suppose, just the lack of kind of policy imagination just was what kind of came across to me when I was chatting to Ciara there about, and obviously it's a devolved administration, so there are limits to what a devolved administration can do. But there does seem to be a lack of kind of policy imagination in terms of measures that we could be doing locally to make a difference.
I think that's right, and I think it probably is down to the nature of our devolved administration that they are operating in silos, and our ministers are just departmental managers, and there's very little cross-cutting, cross-departmental thinking on these thorny problems that transcend all departments. And it would take some fresh thinking. Maybe we should get Timothy Gaston and a few people like him to brainstorm what we could do to find some extra resources that we could apply to new priorities. There's a lot of waste. We're on. We hear the Secretary of State tell us that we've had a record budget settlement with more money to spend than we've ever had before, and yet we're stuck that we don't seem to be able to free up resources for particular priorities, and that's nearly always been the way throughout the whole period of devolution.
We don't want a revenue raise either. So we don't make brave choices. We don't want a revenue raise. Essentially, the solution is Westminster should just pay. That's the solution.
Scotland, even though Scotland has tax-bearing powers, but the SNP, I think it was Nicola Sturgeon, just before she left, she did finally vary the tax raising powers and actually raised the higher rates in Scotland.
Yeah.
So if you ever file a tax return in the UK, for anyone who doesn't know, it asks you, are you based in Scotland or are you based in England, Wales or Northern Ireland, because the tax rates in Scotland the higher rate are different.
But the bad news is that in the past we've always ultimately gone to Westminster and squeezed a bit more out of them. There's nothing to squeeze anymore. Westminster has no money. They are skint. In fact, it'll be a miracle budget if somehow Rachel Reeves is able to balance the books this autumn. There's a huge deficit, current budget deficit, and they've done things like promise to spend hundreds of billions more on defence, up to 3.5%, whatever, of GDP. London has never had it so tight, and I don't want to worry people, but I could see a financial crisis not that far away in the future.
David, just interesting one thing I just wanted to probe with you, just from the interview. You'd said you are a consultation skeptic.
Well,
are consultations a waste of time?
You were leading me on to, I was about to ask you two, because you two have actually had the...
Well, you've declared your position already,
I've written my fair share of consultations. So that's what I wanted to actually put back to you two, because you two would have had the...
Well, I remember a colleague of Tim's once said to me, a fellow in an advisor in government, and he just said, for goodness sake, we've had our consultation, it's called an election.
To me, I think if they're done properly, consultations can be valuable pieces of work. I think where some organisations make a mistake is they kind of want to throw everything but the kitchen sink into them, whereas I think a shorter, more focused consultation response is the way to go. And by the way, you can hire our collective public affairs talents, I'm sure, for an agreed price if you need them. But I think the more focused they are, the better they are, and I think just keeping it relevant to the topic is the other thing. I think a lot of people make a mistake of, they think they have to answer every question in a consultation, which isn't true.
Yeah.
You don't, if it's not relevant to you, I would always say don't answer that question. You're better just keeping it to the things that your speciality to that. That could maybe be, you maybe get 20 questions in a consultation. Maybe there's only 6 of them that are relevant to you. Well, just answer those 6. You're not doing yourself any favours by putting in, by just padding your answers. But then, back to yourselves, Tim, you would have had a fair few consultations in your time. How much attention did you pay to them? whenever they came in.
Well, in terms of, I'll just add some stuff to what you were saying about drafting consultations for anybody who's drafting them and listening. You also don't have to answer the questions they put as well, which people get into a whole flap and they say, none of these questions address our concerns. Well, that's fine. Make sure you put down your concern as well. You can say these questions don't reflect what the people that I'm working with would understand the problem to be. Here's the problem that we understand it, and here's the questions that government should ask, and here's the answers to them. So don't feel that you're constrained and straitjacketed by what civil servants have placed onto the document. You can say what you need to say and what you want. I also agree with you in terms of, if you've got one thing to say, what is the one point that you want government to hear? Because that is going to be the only point that they listen to. If you have a whole document of stuff that's not pointed and not focused, they probably won't pay a lot of attention to what you've written in. Look, if you're a big organisation who's responded to consultations, government will pay a lot of attention to that. So if you're responding to a big consultation, you're one of the big organisations in that area, one of the massive charities across the UK, you're going to get a lot of attention in that. And government may even ask you to help them launch the consultation if you've been particularly positive. So if you're a smaller organisation, how do you get cut through in that? And I think that's what's slightly harder, and that's what's slightly more difficult. I think it's you've got to really focus on one point and bring strong evidence on that point, and that's how you're going to get government to focus on what you're saying. Because look, if you have a consultation where there's thousands and thousands of responses that are coming in, civil servants say they read them all. I mean, I'm sure they don't pay as much attention to every consultation as they would to some of the bigger consultation responses, but they are looking for themes. And can you be a voice in that theme? And then that's what's presented to the minister, and then the minister looks at that and is presented with either people agree with you or they don't. But the reality is, I can't remember a consultation, maybe Michael you can, I can't remember a consultation where the responses came in and they were given to us in summary form and the consultation response changed very much. I do remember consultations where some of the big players in the sector said something which was a little bit at variance, a little bit at odds, and to get their buy-in so we could launch the actual strategy or whatever, the actual policy position with them, we had their buy-in at launch, so we get a fair wind out of the gates. There were changes we made then, but in terms of something that bubbled up, new ministerial submission, I don't remember any time ever saying, that small organisation there is right, let's pull all this down.
Well, my experience is pretty similar. The consultation results come in, the civil servants collate them and have a general report, but the political direction doesn't really change very much. There might be some tweak here and there, although funny enough, I'm involved in a consultation at the moment. I'm not going into the details of it, but where what was originally being proposed has been completely turned around by the results of the consultation. But basically the result of the consultation was a lot of opposition. The other thing that's interesting about consultation is that increasingly ministers' departments have no choice but to go out to consultation and do it rigorously and do it properly, because they'll be caught up in a JR and a judge will say, well, you didn't consult properly and therefore that's unlawful. And it's interesting, finally, to take one of the burning issues of the day. You take Lough Neagh, where all our political parties express their concern about the condition of Lough Neagh and the need to do something about it. And yet several of our major parties voted in the Assembly to stop the Minister, Andrew Muir, even going out to consultation with his proposals. They didn't even want him to consult the public. That's how opposed they were to taking action. Yet all these same people have beat their breasts about the need for action. So it just shows you what they think.
It's like everything, as I always say, like on anything like this, follow the budget rather than the strategy, because the budget is, whether it's poverty or whatever, the budget that they commit to in any government, the resources they're putting into it, gives you their level of intent about whether they're going to do something about it. I think the one thing I do disagree with Ciara on is that I think Scotland in particular has legislated for rights that just cannot be realised and for different things. It's the resources you commit to it in your budget, but your departmental budget's more so here, because obviously each minister decides their own departmental budget. It's what they're willing to put forward on housing, Loughnane, whatever it is. That's how you know what the priority is.
Another good example of that was Kelly Armstrong's bill act required an integrated education strategy. So the ministers come out with a strategy, not unlike some other Stormont strategies, and but no additional resource worth talking about.
Bringing this back to the poverty strategy, I think we're all agree the poverty strategy is a bit of a mess, and urgent action is needed to remedy it.
Yeah, well, we'll see whether. Although Gordon could just play. I mean, because I'm not sure whether Sinn Féin are gonna. Do we need Sinn Féin to pull the plug on it? I'm not sure whether they are.
Well, ministers have a cunning fallback trick, and the trick is to say, well, of course the strategy's high level. We only intended it to be high level. We're going to follow up with detailed action plans that will implement.
And we're now going to see this from because obviously Stormont comes back in early September, and really I think once we're properly into the session, we are going to hear more and more the refrain of, but after the election, shortened mandate. After the election, shortened mandate. We're going to hear that repeated, and I think that will be what will happen with something like this. It'll be like, look, we'll try and improve it after the election, and we'll come back to it. I think, and we'll not just on this, but I think a whole host of issues we will be hearing this more and more and more. So anyway, okay, we'll go on to our next topic, and again, just a quick comment on this. We did an announcement last week. It wasn't really an announcement; it was more a leak rather than an announcement. But we understand the BBC are reporting that the Irish Language Commissioner and the Ulster Scots and British Heritage Commissioners have been approved and gotten over the line. Paul Deeds, who is the Deputy Chief Executive for Force na Gaeilge, has been touted for the Irish Language Commissioner role, and Lee Reynolds, who was on this podcast, has been touted as the Ulster Scots Commissioner. Now, we're not going to focus on the personalities because, again, we'll wait and see whether they take up post. Again, this is a leak. We'll wait till we get kind of proper formal announcements on that. But the fact that it's been agreed, Tim, I'll go to you first on this. It could be a while before these people actually take up post. In a way, just because because this is a leak, just to put it out there in terms of, before we get offices set up and things like that, we could still be waiting a while before we actually see any kind of formal actions.
Well, nobody's formally accepted the offer from what we can gather. I mean, I think, people have been told they've been successful. It's a whole other matter of will they take up the post and will they move from positions they're in to take up these posts. I wouldn't suspect that anything will be in place minimum before January. Really, it could even be Easter next year, with even a fair wind. Because we've been talking a lot about money already today. And whilst budgets have already been set, there's things within that need to be agreed and nailed down, and how those budgets are going to be allocated, and what's going to be resource and capital and all of those sorts of things. There's a long way to go from appointing a commissioner to that commissioner being in post and the office opening and the ribbon being cut and all of that. Yep, whilst this has been announced. Could be early in the new year. Now, of course, it's interesting as well that the TUV have come out and roundly criticised the appointment of an Irish language commissioner. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays in. I mean, going back to what we were talking about last week in terms of polling, is this going to be something, there's going to be a wedge issue that the TUV can point to say, well, look what the DUP have done. They've appointed this commissioner. They are... they're not listening to what grassroots unionisms are saying. I think certainly the TUV will try that. Whether that's any cut through or not, I don't know. But time will tell.
And obviously, because Northern Ireland being Northern Ireland, the two have to be appointed together and move along together as well. They can't be done separately. Michael, just some of your quick thoughts on the fact that we have it looks like we've got progress on getting these.
I think progress is always to be welcomed. You've got to love the TUV, though, that they welcome the Ulster Scots Commissioner, but they're opposed to the Irish Language Commissioner. I mean, it's just bordering on the silly. But I welcome the appointment of the Príomh Oifigiúil na Teanga Gaeilge, agus the High Hegion of the Ulster Scots.
These types of roles, as we've seen with the Children's Commissioner and the Older Persons Commissioner, are only as good as the person who's in office.
Yeah.
And we've seen some good people in those offices, and some who've not been as good and as vocal in those offices. And that's the reality. I mean, this is only going to be as effective as the person makes it.
Yeah, and obviously we need to actually get formal confirmation that those two people are actually, as Tim was saying, we need to wait and see whether they actually take up post, and then even if they do, when do they actually come into...
But it's nice that shortly after you do a Stormont Sources interview, you're projected and catapulted right to the very top of our society.
Well, that's amazing. I don't think anyone's knocking our doors so I don't think it's benefiting any of the regular contributors on the podcast. But look, gents, that's all we have time for, and thank you very much for going around the houses. Our thanks also to Dr. Ciara Fitzpatrick as well for joining us too. Just a reminder, you can WhatsApp us as you're listening with questions and comments, ideally using a voice note so we can play it on next week's episode. 34046507. You can send it in Irish or Ulster Scots. We'll may as well for the episode that's in it. We get someone to translate it for us. But that's all we have time for this edition of Stormont Sources. Thank you for listening in. Please keep in touch with your questions, ideas and comments. That's all from Tim, Michael and myself. We'll see you next week.